Today's conversation is especially meaningful to me because our guest is not only someone I've worked with closely professionally, but someone whose work has deeply impacted my own family and me personally. Dr. Lona Cook is a chiropractor, speaker, educator, and founder of Cook Chiropractic Center and Well Adjusted Students, a nonprofit that brings chiropractic care directly into the schools to support kids through nervous system centered care. Because today, so many people are exhausted and running on overdrive. And so we're dealing with more sleep, anxiety, focus, immune issues, all of it. And most people are just trying to piece together answers while also feeling like no one really is looking at the whole picture. So that's what this conversation is really about. And I'm excited to have you here, Lona.
Thanks for all you do for us, getting our message out and finding the right people to talk to so we can grow our reach, because I do really love this work that we do because it is meaningful. It's changed my life. I see how it changes other people's lives. It changes pretty much how you approach everything when you start to get I'm going to say the big idea or a change in how you look at health and life and intelligence, meaning life is intelligent, and everything that happens has some sort of connection to that, which is generally not taught to us at a young age. So yeah, it's fun getting to share on platforms because hopefully someone listening will be curious. I think curiosity is generally the tipping point of maybe I could try on a different idea, or maybe I could approach my well-being from a different vantage point. So thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. And just over the last year of us working together, I have learned so much and have had so many aha moments. And I think that's what this conversation will bring for a lot of people today. So, like you said, it can just be that tipping point that leads to so much more. So, let's kind of start way back. So, I know that you've been doing this work since 2010, but take us back maybe even further. Like, what was the moment or experience that made you choose chiropractic, or how it's even, just aided in your story as well? So we'll just start there.
Yeah. So I have been one of those people that was fortunate that my family had already been utilizing chiropractors since two generations before me, which is fairly unheard of. Chiropractic's only been around since 1895 is when the profession was kind of birthed into its iteration that we see it now. Don't get me wrong. I think there's been bone setters for eons probably, but my grandfather and his mom, so this would have been in the 1920s, the 1930s, had chiropractic care. And then my father, obviously, as his generation came in, my grandfather took his kids to the chiropractor. So here I come along and I'm colicky. And my dad convinces my mom she needs to go to the chiropractor. And, you're a parent that hasn't slept in a while, you'll try anything, right? So my mom willingly went the hour drive north to my dad's chiropractor from where he grew up. And that was my first adjustment. But then we became a chiropractic family, right? So for me, it was very normal that you didn't feel well or something happened. Instead of going to the medical doctor, for the most part, we just went to the chiropractor. I wasn't there all the time by any means, but my dad went a lot, and he also did construction. And so I just really saw it seemed like he was happier because he went and got adjusted. He definitely seemed to do better with the physicality of his job by going and getting adjusted. And so that's really what inspired me as I saw that it made a difference in my own family growing up. And then my chiropractor growing up, her name was MJ Gonstead. She was just a really neat lady. And I thought it's pretty cool that she helps people with just her hands. I thought everybody had a chiropractor. I didn't really realize it was odd that I got to go as a child. So that really helped my, I think, approach to practice, because in my mind, it was already very normal for people to just get it and understand why you take care of your structure, because it's taking care of your brain and your nervous system, and everything flows better when there's balance and alignment. Fast forward then, and I'm in chiropractic school, and I leave chiropractic school and kind of have a crash course in life for a little bit there, which I guess life always is sort of a crash course, get you where you're supposed to be. But it was fairly rocky at that moment. And I really think that was where, over the next couple years, there was a true awakening for me and I didn't really realize it at the moment that things were happening, but our philosophy in chiropractic that chiropractic has been founded on teaches some of these principles of life, I would say, which is that our systems are intelligent and that life flows through us, right? Like when I'm teaching this to lay people, I'll say, like, if I was a cadaver over here, you can see all my physical parts, but what's missing? The spark of life, right? That energy that animates us. We don't think about that often, but there really is a lot more to us than just the physicalness of our bodies. At that time, I was actively like in a state of dis-ease or disharmony in like what I thought I should be doing versus what was going to happen. And that was where I really woke up. I realized like I have been always kind of forcing things to happen or not paying attention and letting life just happen to me versus really awakening to that I have power to how I go about so many things in my life, but it's going to come from like radical responsibility to my outcomes, not just saying, oh, like that's a coincidence that this negative thing happened, even though I've been in a negative state for a while. Right. So I say that just because to me, I was getting adjusted my whole life, but I didn't really awaken to the philosophy of looking at life differently until after I had, started to pursue where was I going to practice? Was I going to open a practice? And then just this weird series of events just really kind of shook me awake. And that's then also when I started to learn this philosophy deeper, which the philosophy of life and philosophy of healing, you can really apply to every part of your life. And it changes how you see yourself in the mix, meaning when I think you get put back in the driver's seat of your own life because you recognize you do have a lot more responsibility to create the life you want and the health you want, it actually should be good news for most people. The good news is you have choices here. The maybe bad news is it's going to be all up to you and you got to find the right people to help you do that. And you also may have to change quite a bit, right? And that's really where the philosophy came alive for me.
And I think, Lona, too, when I was reading your book Reclamation, which we'll have in all of the show notes for people to grab, but examples really help kind of set things into stone and show like, oh, that's shown up in my life in this way or that way. Because when you talk about these hard decisions, or maybe it felt like all of these negative things were happening at once, but how it can be a sign.
Right.
Because I think in one way or another, that is always happening to people, but it's how we choose to move forward. So can you maybe share a couple of examples of how that was showing up for you?
Yeah. Yeah, dramatically, and this is where I start the book, is like I was held up at gunpoint in Costa Rica right before I was going to graduate. And of course that sounds like dramatic and scary and it was off-putting, of course. But it was almost like, and I don't know if you've ever had this sensation, Hailey, but I feel like I wasn't really living in my body at the time. Like life was just kind of happening to me. I didn't know what I was going to do after school. I was on paper successful. Like I was getting good grades. I was about to graduate and get my doctorate. I like could do the adjustment, but I wasn't really present. And so I go through this experience, I get held up at gunpoint. So I really needed to take a pause. I really needed to regroup. And so, a gun to the chest is a pretty good pause. I can laugh about it because honestly, like it happened and it was one of those things where I was fine afterwards. They just took some of my stuff and I went back to the apartment that I was staying in. And I just remember sitting there thinking like, wow, like that just happened. And then again, like it didn't hit me overnight, but as I reflected back, that was the catalyst that then over the next month I changed. I went from thinking that I was going to force this living situation in California and this job that I had lined up to like the day before I was supposed to move to California, I kind of like humbled myself and realized there's really no reason I'm moving out there other than I said I was going to do it. So kind of like that egoic, like, well, I said it, I can't back down because what would that mean? And I don't think in my life up until that point, at least not in my adult life, I had had moments where I allowed myself to actually be humbled and like try something new on. Like just because I thought I had to do it one way didn't mean that I had to do it that way. To me, when I reflect back on that period, I believe it was synchronistic, right? Like that happened in Costa Rica. I came home, all of this shifted for me. And it was like a light switch flipped quite frankly, because when I got back and I humbled myself and I realized I don't believe I'm supposed to move and I'm actually going to let myself like fail right now, meaning I'm not going to do what I said I was going to do, which did feel like failure in that moment. And I remember my mom saying, well, are we leaving tomorrow? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to make a decision. And I'm sure
I
she
love
thought this was nuts, like, and so the next morning I said, I don't think I'm supposed to go. I'm not going. And I still needed to finish my like internship, which at the time I was supposed to do in California and then take this job. And so I called one of my mentors and I just said, like, I'm not going. And they were like, good. They had all thought I shouldn't go anyways. And so I stayed. I did my internship there. I ended up looking around back home, which for me was here in Wisconsin, and started trying on the idea of like, well, what if I opened my own practice? And I tell you what, I think the part that stands out is like when I surrendered and let myself actually back down, which was just very different for me, like weird synchronicities kept happening, like things that I had to just pause and be like, what is happening? Like, why does this feel easy all of a sudden when everything kind of had felt hard for quite some time? Right. And again, like my life wasn't so bad. I was in grad school, but I had been in an abusive relationship. I had, been surrounded by culture of like drinking. And that's how I made money in grad school, was doing like bartending and promotional work and stuff like that. So I was just surrounded by, I'm going to say, a lot of like lower energy activities, and I was participating in it fully. That then when I had that humbling experience and allowed myself to actually shift, all of a sudden life just started to feel like this feels really different, which I think happens when we let ourselves actually change, right? We're never going to find the solutions coming at the problem from the exact same perspective, doing the exact same things in the exact same environments. And that's, I think, where the good news of healing comes from, is like, if you're willing to change, and this is true for any part of our life, not just healing our physical body, it's healing our finances, healing our relationships. It's like, we've got to be brave enough to take our power back to change. Right.
100%. And I think once you start, like you said, having that humbling experience, but then start to notice and be aware of what's happening because of that, or because the way you're changing, sometimes it's almost like, this feels good, too good to be true. Or like, why do all these good things start happening? Because maybe we're used to surrounding ourselves with something different. And
Right.
so I know for me, that's been a big learning curve. And also those big ahas of like just being aware and noticing. And
Mhm.
so I think that leads me to, you talk a lot about tone, right? The idea that frequency is always running through us, that energy through your nervous system,
Yeah.
and it can affect everything from the stress to healing to how we experience life. So,
Yep.
can you maybe explain that a little bit more, or what that actually means for someone listening that, like, I have no idea what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, we know tone like muscle tone, and we know tone like musical note tone, right? And like, let's use the example of a tone played on a string instrument, right? Like you pluck the string and it vibrates and a tone comes off of that instrument. Like the way I look at our bodies is they're not so different. They're kind of like an instrument, if you will. And there is a certain frequency that we sometimes get so enmeshed in that we're like, this is just how I am, right? Like this is just my persona. And that's part of learning, like you actually can choose to play a different tone through your life, right? So we've all probably had experiences where we've had a really bad day, and from that bad day, like maybe you wake up in the morning and the dog threw up, or like something happened, and the way that the day starts is on like, ugh, this feels negative. And if you let it influence you to be in an angry state or in a depressed state or whatever, generally more like attracts like, right? So that tone or that energy that now you've taken on, like, this is a bad day, generally builds momentum and more bad stuff happens. And hopefully you catch it and the next day doesn't turn into the like second bad day or the bad week or the bad year or the bad life, right? So tone, or this idea we say like life flows above, down, inside out. This frequency moves through your system. Your nervous system is part of like this apparatus that literally plays electromagnetic tone or energy through your system. So when we talk about like healing, our ability to shift that tone. So, for example, let's say things that happened in your life and your body ended up just really holding a lot of tension from, could be even mental, emotional things that have happened, but you hold that tension in that almost like flight or fight nature in your physiology. That's going to play a different tone in the tissue than somebody who maybe has learned how to release stress through doing breath work or having regular chiropractic care or doing yoga. All of those things are part of the way that we essentially manage this electromagnetic frequency or conduit that's moving through us. And this energy is entangling in everybody else's energy. So we've all witnessed when somebody walks into the room and you know that they're angry or they're about to like get in a fight, we've been able to pick that up or perceive that before they actually open their mouth, right? That's because this energetic channel that we all carry is not just what's physically perceptible, right?
Mhm.
This is also generally why when you get around people that you love, like you kind of harmonize together. You just like, I don't know why I love them so much. I just instantly connected with them. It's because just like musical instruments that sound harmonized, our tones intermix with people that we likely also harmonize with. And the opposite can be true too, where you're like, I don't know why my hair just raises when that person's around and like I can't do it. Because there's a lot more to us than just again the physicalness or what's being said. It's also the like way that we walk into the room, the energy that we carry, the state that we're in, which one of my favorite books is called Power versus Force. It talks all about these human states. So we know that when we're in a state of grief or shame, what that feels like in our system. And hopefully we don't stay there a long time because that's a really hard thing to have a lot of energy, right? When you're feeling deep grief or deep shame. Very different feeling than when you're neutral, or very different feeling than when you're at peace or having an experience of that's joyous, and the goal for most of us is, I believe, to have more experiences that are like these powerful energetic states like love and joy. And would you believe it, your tissues actually do better. Like your body actually heals better when, of course, you're in these more powerful states because there's a lot more energy moving through you. Right. And people get attracted to be around you more because there's more energy there. So it's really, I guess, like more of a quantum way of looking at the body. But I think we're past the point of saying it's like woo woo. Like there's plenty of like research out there talking about these things and even talking about, we think about things being genetic, but who do we learn our energetic states usually from? Our parents, our lineage, right? And there's a whole element of biology now called epigenetics that talks about how the environment that we're surrounded in turns on gene expression, right? So it's just that I think healthcare hasn't totally caught up to some of this yet. We're still in some ways like acknowledging these things, but yet when it comes to like perceiving and listening to our bodies, we still tend to get so dialed in and focused on just like one element of what's happening in our body versus and like, well, this is my bad left hip, or you
Mhm.
know, this is my this problem, instead of saying, okay, how's this whole person existing right now? And what's the tone that's happening not only in their persona and how they approach life, but also like what's happening around them, right? And how are they having to respond and show up, and maybe what's happened before that created this person that responds this way, right? So that's where I think, that's why you're your own best doctor, because you're the only one really truly living in your skin, and you're also the one that has the most amount of influence to make changes, which will create the opportunity to heal and create something new. So
And can you share, Lona, maybe for somebody that's listening that maybe is in this energetic state that is more like grief or shame or feeling like it's bad day after bad day, or
mhm.
even if it's just little things like how can they shift their energy,
Yeah.
or where are places that they can start, or maybe things you even do to help?
Mhm. Sometimes it's actually doing the opposite. It's really acknowledging instead of trying to avoid. Like sometimes I think part of the reason what happens is like we're trying to avoid feeling like I'm angry or I'm upset about this. And so sometimes it is acknowledging that two things can exist at once, meaning like I can have resentment or anger. And at the same time, I can be recognizing that, yes, this happened and I had these feelings about it and I don't want to carry them forward anymore. Right. I'm going to choose to do things that are nourishing to me or bring me a little more energy. And this is where I would say, like, making even like a list of like, who are the people that I feel the best around? What are the things I love to do? I'm someone who has always, before I was really awake to some of this stuff, knowing that if I was having a bad day and I would go run or I would go move my energy, generally I did better, right? Like I would feel differently. I could do whatever needed to be done next. Versus if I didn't move my body, it usually just was like I would snowball into a worse position. So that's where you need to have your list and your people. And then we also need to look at like, well, what do I need to stop doing? Right. Because sometimes it is, and this is the work. Like everybody says, like, did you do the work? Right. The work is the internal work on some level, which is the part of becoming aware of your own patterns. And that doesn't mean you need to be perfect when you became aware of your patterns. It just means like, I'll use a personal example. I have 3 stepdaughters, and I always felt like after a weekend when they're there and they're great kids, there's just a lot of rigmarole that would go into like picking kids up, dropping kids off, 2 exes in this, like it just was a lot of people influencing our every other weekend. So I always felt almost like hungover after those weekends. And then I feel like it'd be like a scab where I'd try and pick it with my husband, right? Of like, oh, we're going to end up being in like a negative state because I'm not going to be able to stop picking at the scab. And then both of us are going to be like low vibrational energy about the whole scenario, right? Because he's not going to say what I want him to say, and I'm not going to do what he wants me to do. And it's just going to be bad, right? And so part of the inner work was me realizing like, this is like enmeshment right now. Like, this isn't healthy for either of us. And the pattern, I have to choose to change the pattern. I can't change him. I'm not like going to come in there and try and meddle things up any further. What I need to do is give myself permission to just engage differently and figure out what works for me. Not everyone else may not understand why I choose to do it that way, but I just see how unhealthy this current pattern is. And we're not going to live like this any longer, right? Because I don't want to do that. And so for me, then it was like, if I was already not in a great place for those weekends, sometimes I had to give myself permission, like on Saturday, like, I'm just going to go have some alone time. I might go do something different just so that I had a breather. Or like after the fact, I would just remind myself sometimes, like if I wanted to go and say something, I would just have to tell myself, like, not my circus, not my monkeys. Everybody's happy. They don't need me to chime in right now. Right. And then literally like shut my mouth, and that was changing a pattern for me. And the more I allowed myself to lean into, like, even though it was almost like a reflex, because in our negative states, it can feel almost like it's like the devil that we know. Right. And we just keep going back to it, even though we know we're not going to get a fulfilling outcome. Right. And I don't know if you've had that experience, Haley, but for me, that's the work where I'm like, I'm breaking this pattern. If I used to do it every other weekend and now I only do it once a quarter, that's healing.
Yeah.
Right. And over time, that wound actually closes up. And lo and behold, also, I believe our physiology changes because we're not putting ourselves back in that really stressed state. Right.
Yes. And thank you for sharing. I think, of course, examples always help, but it's like you said, it's putting in the work and making the choice. And sometimes the choice is the hardest part.
Right.
But then it's not just overnight that it's going to change things or heal things. It takes work and takes repetition because we're so used to going back into like what we've always done or the way we've always reacted. But like you said, that's every other weekend. So if that continued to happen,
Right.
what does that snowball effect have?
Right. What's our life like? Right. And, in chiropractic, we say like, well, how do people get subluxated or out of balance to begin with? Or how does that energetic channel get dimmed? Right. And we say that it's from thoughts, traumas, and toxins. Right. And so thoughts is auto-suggestion. Like when I'm feeding myself negative thoughts because I'm the one receiving those thoughts and broadcasting them, right? Nobody else forced me to think a certain way, right? Now, maybe I picked that up from like my lineage somehow, but it's my job to change that, right? So when I'd say something that was like negative about myself, And so that was super helpful to like catch that midstream, because how many of us, if we read what we thought about ourselves, or even the things that we do say out loud about ourselves when we're like self-deprecating, like it's not leading to health and well-being. We're literally putting that like that spell, that's what it is on some level, over ourselves. And so that's one thing, is like the thoughts and the words. The second part, the trauma, right? The trauma can be physical trauma, like a car accident, it can be old sporting injuries, it can be micro trauma, like I sit too much, I cross my legs a certain way and I'm sitting 8 hours a day. It can be trauma like emotional trauma, because that gets stored in the body as well. And those things, like again, full picture, are influencing everything is connected within our system. So, if I have something that for whatever reason my body takes some trauma to, let's just say, my lower back, or holds that energy into a more compromised position, now the rest of my body has to make adjustments for that. Like it does some compensation for that, which works for a while until we just keep loading more things on and we don't have enough habits and other things that unload the body and bring resiliency back and bring adaptability back. And then the last one's toxins, which I think, again, it's a perfect storm, right? If my body is well resourced, well rested, well adjusted, with positive thoughts as much as possible, like I can probably handle a little more toxic load because we're exposed to lots of things in this current like modern day living. But if my system's already overwhelmed and now I get in a house with mold, or I'm drinking only Diet Pepsi and not getting enough water, like my resiliency goes way down. And that's another thing that'll really throw off the body's ability to heal, because health really is a natural state.
Mhm.
We just have not been taught that. And we have not been taught how to build back health well.
And so the idea that the body is always working to heal itself, even with all of these things it has coming at it. Like you
Right.
said, I think we could do a whole episode just on toxins and
Yeah.
that coming into us. But for someone that hasn't really heard of innate intelligence or this idea that the body can heal itself, because I think we're taught so differently, can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So sometimes we have to learn how to even look for it, right? Because it's happening for all of us. Nobody is without this intelligence operating through their systems, because all of us on some level know that if we scrape our knee, whether that scrape heals in 2 days or 12 days, like your system is doing the best to send the right clotting factors to make the scab to heal, to heal the wound, right? That's that intelligence working through our system intelligently all the time, turning over the cells in the stomach, turning over the cells of all the different organs so that you're remade new, because our cells are constantly rebuilding. It's how a baby, this intelligence working through this electromagnetic nervous system, like how does a baby's system know where to put the eyes versus the ears versus, like these stem cells developing into things? Like clearly there's something very intelligent or very organized working through our systems that we're not consciously directing. I think that's one of the biggest things to understand, is like this is not conscious, right? This is just on the job all the time working for you. But then it's like it's challenging, because sometimes we see like, well, let's use a simple example. Let's say you ingested some food that was questionable last night and you were violently sick over the night. We are taught in our culture, like, we're sick, I don't want to be throwing up. We might even try and suppress the throwing up, right? But actually, that's the system's intelligence saying, get this out of me, right? Like, this is not supposed to be in me. And whatever it is likely toxic to me. That's why my body like violently got rid of it. If we haven't been taught to look for that happening, we can mistake some of the body's intelligence as actually like, this is unwanted. I think a lot of the differences I see in some of the most like vibrant, vital people that have learned this is their ability to sit with what the system is doing, to sit with the symptom and ask better questions and to try and support the resiliency, because the body is its own best detoxifier, best healer. It's always working to try and create life, essentially. Like your body's not abandoning you. However, given the resources it's given and sometimes the lack of change we offer it, it's likely trying to show you what needs to change.
When you say, like, when we can learn to sit with it, that can be really hard.
Really uncomfortable.
And and especially, too, even as a mom, and I know I've struggled with this so much, you've helped me with this, I have other people that have been able to be like, "No, they are
Mhm.
going to be okay. We just need to give the body." So, like, even as you said, with throwing up, it's the same
Mhm.
as fever. They don't need Tylenol right away to suppress the fever because it's actually the body's
Right.
been
Yeah.
telling us, right? And so that kind of brings me to the next thing of for us, chiropractic has been huge for earaches,
Mhm.
constipation,
Mhm.
sleep, anxiety, like all of those things that I never had any clue that chiropractic could help with it, or just that our body is working to heal itself. So what's your hot take on all of that?
Yeah, I think again, like if we could know that we could listen to our bodies, and then if we spent most of our effort and energy and money doing the best job we can to support the resiliency in the body, meaning like we look at a lot of what we've been taught as healthcare and even things that are done in the name of wellness, which blow my mind on some level, but most of it is sick care, just given a different title, right? Like to me, like a flu shot is not wellness, right? That is at best potentially a guess at what the like flu strain may be. And there's still a heck of a lot of toxins in that vial that the body has to navigate in hopes that we may avoid getting sick with the flu, right? And this isn't to judge vaccination, it's just to say that there's a lot in the paradigm that would start to beg questions when you start to realize, like, okay, if I'm doing my best to stay as resilient and supported, which is, means like I'm I'm eating well, maybe not perfectly, but I'm trying to like actually nourish my body. I am getting proper water. I am trying to work on my stress levels and not my circus, not my monkeys kind of thing. Like what can I control? What can I control? I'm getting the rest I need. I'm surrounded by people more often that I love to be around. So I have good support and love. Now my body is doing better than when I wasn't doing those things, right? So this is the difference between two, like, do I fear things for my system versus can I recognize that my body's adaptable? My body's meant to be resilient and engaging in its environment. And I can trust that if my body comes across that flu, and even if I get sick, it will know what to do to get rid of it. Right.
Mm.
Instead of feeling like I don't trust my body, I need to use these outside things that also come with consequences on the chance that it may do something for me. Right. So they're just really different ways of approaching where is health built. Right. So then chiropractic comes in because the nervous system is housed by the spine, right? The brain is protected by the skull. The spinal bones are protecting that spinal cord. That spinal cord is the energetic highway that is sending the electricity through the system. And so if that system is torqued quite a bit or has these areas of imbalance, it's like that you just have to work harder to like send the messages, right? Which brings that resiliency or that adaptability down. So when it comes to like kids having ear infections, let's just use that one as an example. Like many times that can be a sign that there's an underlying imbalance in the upper cervical part of the spine and that energy isn't flowing as well through those nerves. Therefore, the drainage that should happen in the ear and how that tissue is like health wise sets up a more potential for a reoccurring flood essentially to be in the ear, which harbors the bacteria, right? So if we just go in and clean out the bacteria through an antibiotic, maybe it gets rid of the ear infection right then. It doesn't change the underlying condition that led to like why that ear isn't draining in the first place as well. And likely we've now wiped out all the good bacteria in our body, let alone possibly some other side effects. So again, this doesn't mean that there's not a time and a place for that. It just is overutilized because we don't have many times the words of encouragement of even like what is possible if you just didn't do some of those reactive behaviors, right? Because we really do want our kids to grow robust immune systems. And that does mean that they're meant to become exposed to some of these things. And that's how they actually grow immune systems that can handle what's present in our world versus always relying on something else to come in and like douse it or fix it.
I think part of it too, and some of the reason behind this podcast is I just don't think there's also enough education out there or even that understanding of like chiropractic can help these things, but then even going deeper than chiropractic and what we're talking about today, just that aha of knowing of like, wow, our bodies really are powerful and they can heal without this intervention always. And so it wasn't until, the twins that when they had an ear infection, it's like we went to the chiropractor and immediately the next day they had no more pain.
Mhm.
And so we continued to do that from there on out.
Yes.
And then when one of them was constipated, it's like we went there and they're able to, like you said, remove that subluxation or actually like where the stem of it's coming from. And it's helped. Like it just
Right.
is pretty crazy to me when you start looking at the things of they don't need to be on Miralax every day or doing all of these things. And I still see all these posts on Facebook from moms like, and it's nothing that's wrong that they're
Right.
doing because that's just what they know.
Right.
How
Or
can
they think it's the only option right now. And I think it is a hard bridge. And Haley, like you're really good at walking this bridge with people, I think, too, because the hard part sometimes is when you're kind of straddling the natural way
yeah,
and the medical model, because at some point, it doesn't mean that we can't work together. We certainly need to. But if we're like getting adjusted, but every time there's a sign that something might be slightly off again, we go back and bring antibiotics. It's like we're just preventing that immune system from really having to build its own muscle, if that makes sense. So that's one of the hardest places, I think, is like opening the awareness that we could be doing things differently. But then there is this element where we have to get back to trusting our bodies. And then I'll use the example. My kids get sick. But what I will tell you happens is because I've never suppressed a fever, knock on wood, I've never felt the need to. And so I'll let it ramp up. Of course, they're irritable. They don't act like themselves, but they're engaged. I've never worried that they're not like okay. And within usually like 12 to 24 hours, we are through it. Like, and so I think the more we let our systems do what are possible by supporting it through other things like clean food, rest. We need to, and that's another thing that we just don't do well is actually allow for rest for adults, especially. And then we prolong kind of the like dis-ease, if that's possible to understand. It's just like the body has a harder time reestablishing that homeostasis because it's depleted. Right. So for our younger kids, they're already usually more resilient, but certainly like wanting to look at like, okay, well, what can I do to support that resiliency? And then can I really help them learn to trust their bodies and listen to their bodies? And that's going to serve them for their lifetime. And then we use things like chiropractic or nutrition or acupuncture or teaching them how to use their breath, or go outside or go drink a glass of water. Like that's the doctor to them on some level. Mhm.
yeah. And I just appreciate you and helping us with that too, because I know that's something like we're currently working through with the twins and their asthma because we have always had to rely on whether it's the emergency room or the inhaler or the steroids. And I want to get to a point where we don't have to rely on that, but how can we retrain the body? And sometimes as a mom, it can be really scary, but then I know that it's also scary for the child of like that
Yes.
feeling of not being able to breathe.
Right.
Mm.
And thank God we live in this country where there is amazing help when we need it. I think the hard part is at some point, we don't want the cycle to be that we rely on it so heavily that we're always in a reactive state. And so trying to do, and Haley, you guys have been doing such a great job of like, what are the things that we can really try and support his system with? And then also knowing there is a time and a place to go in, right? And that is where also when we learn to trust our own systems and our own intuition, right? Because a lot of times that hasn't been fostered well either. I have a girlfriend that she had twins and she birthed the first vaginally. And then I just know something is off. And I followed my intuition and they ended up needing to have a C-section, but she had already transferred and it all worked out beautifully. And both kids are super healthy. But like, she is someone who knew, like, trust that nudge internally. And so again, this is something I'm hoping that over, time we build back in is more of this like maternal trust and support. And that is also, I know you interviewed Erica Boland, I think there needs to be a change in how we view birth culture in our
100%.
yeah, in our culture. And that will lead to more resiliency and more support across the board for our mothers. And then of course the babies and the kids as they're growing up. So,
Yes.
mhm.
Well, Lona, I know that we could talk for hours,
Yeah.
but for someone who is listening who maybe is feeling overwhelmed with all the things or just disconnected from themselves or, frustrated with all the things they've tried for their kids and nothing is working, like where would you want them to start or what would you say to them?
You got to find somewhere where you feel, and I would advocate that finding a great chiropractor where you feel like you're heard and you're also willing to hear, right? Because that there's two parts of this is that you've got to be heard of like, what have you been through? What are you looking for? What's the story for you or your kids? And then don't be afraid to also be curious about what they're going to offer because it may require you challenging some beliefs as well as like hopefully linking arms where you can trust some of their certainty of how to walk forward because it is a bridge to cross on some level of like learning that doesn't happen immediately. It takes not only educationally learning what you're looking for and what's going to build house, but walking it out too, right? Because it can be theoretical, but until the rubber meets the road, like that's when you really are like, okay, like we're living differently now. And I can see the benefits. I had a family this week that mom and kids have been getting adjusted consistently for years. Dad was consistent and then fell off for about a year. And finally, mom was like, I'm sick of taking you to the ER because he's had a lot of breathing issues for the last year. And he didn't connect the dots until she was like, look, like you stopped getting adjusted. Your body's like really struggling immune wise. And it wasn't before. So like you can do this because this is something simple and you only have to show up every so often and get,
I love that it takes like 5 minutes and you're
yes.
in and out. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And for me, that's a big piece of it is like, I recognize like for this to be something that's part of people's lifestyle, it has to be easy. And it has to be like through process of osmosis that you're not only getting the benefits of the adjustment, but you're hearing a little bit more about your body. You're learning a little bit more about how everything's connected. And over time, hopefully that is part of what helps you look at life and health from a little bit different paradigm. Mhm.
And I think your team does such a good job with that. And I know I will share all of the links of where people can find you at Cook Chiropractic Center. But even the new doctor chats that you're doing is just getting more education out there, helping people to understand the things they can do to heal themselves too. So, is there anything you want to add, Dr. Lona, about where people can find you?
You can put any of their stuff down below. We'd love to take care of you in the Chippewa Valley and, just stay curious. I think I was having this conversation with another chiropractor. I was like, don't you just feel like the more you know, the less you know on some level, like the more curious you become about, isn't that fascinating? The body's doing this, like that curiosity, I think from a humble place of just like, okay, your system's intelligent. The symptom showed up. Why is it here? What is it trying to show me? Like, if you can do that for yourself somewhat, where you learn to just say, what do you think this is about? You can a lot of times connect the dots for yourself on some things like, oh, isn't that funny? Like, I had a really stressful weekend. And then all of a sudden, this symptom popped up. And I'm supposed to have that weekend again this weekend. Maybe I should go about it differently. Right.
Yeah.
Staying curious is a really good spot for healing. Mhm.
So, thank you, Lona. I appreciate you as always. And I know our listeners will gain so much from this episode. So, thank you.
Thanks for having me.